a rain of fire. This is how residents of several Israeli cities are describing the last days. Since June 13th, Iran claims to have launched about 450 missiles against Israel, a number that in itself scares, but when you understand the type of weaponry involved, the severity of the situation is even clearer. And this massive offensive was not by chance. She came in a direct response to Israeli attacks against Iranian nuclear and military targets. What was once a war of words and silent sabotage now has become an open climb, with real ammunition, lives at risk, and attention that threatens to overflow for the entire region. Despite the impressive number of 450 missiles, it is important to understand, most of them were intercepted by Israeli defense systems. But not all. Some managed to cross the defensive shield and cause damage. There was a destruction of civil infrastructure and, unfortunately, also fatal victims. Iran has a huge arsenal. Much of it is still composed of short-range old missiles dating from decades ago. However, the game has changed, because along with these more basic missiles, Iran began to launch more advanced weapons. We are talking about missiles like Gator and Kamshar, and to complicate even more, they are combining these missiles with kamikaze drones, all in an attempt to confuse Israel's air defense system. And the strategy seems clear: to saturate the defense system. Shoot dozens of missiles at the same time, bombarding with successive drone waves. Create a true air chaos. The logic behind it: forcing Israel to use as much interceptors as possible on each attack wave. The more Israel fires, the faster your defense stocks run out. And here comes one of the greatest military proud of Israel: its air defenses. The country has three main protection layers: Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow 3, each with a specific function. Iron Dome is the best known. He takes care of short-range missiles, those who fall on cities and villages. David's Sling takes care of medium-range threats, while Arrow 3 is reserved for long-range ballistic missiles. But even with all this technology, no defense is infallible, especially when the enemy understands his response capacity and begins to play with it. Iranian tactics are clearly trying to exhaust the system, launch more missiles than the number of interceptors available. A dangerous game, where just a missile escaped to cause a tragedy. And there is something that is hard to calculate, but it weighs a lot: the psychological factor. Even though most missiles are intercepted, the simple fact of listening to sirens several times a day, running to shelters, living in constant fear, this already affects the morals of any population. And it is precisely here that the situation begins to change the level. Because Iran, realizing that their saturation tactics were putting the Israeli defenses under pressure, decided to further increase the level of the game. On June 17th, the Iranian authorities announced the use of a new type of weaponry: the hypersonic missile Fata, a name that, until a few months ago, looked more like a future promise, but now officially entered the battlefield. Fata is a weapon that arouses concern in any military expert. It is a missile capable of achieving impressive speeds, up to 15 times the speed of sound. Just for you to get an idea of what that means, while a common ballistic missile can be detected and intercepted with some reaction time, a hypersonic missile reduces this window to seconds. And it's not just speed that makes it dangerous. The main feature of Fata is its unpredictable trajectory. It can change direction during the flight, making it even more difficult to intercept. The Israeli radars, which already work under pressure from threat volume, now need to deal with a projectile that practically disappears and reappears in the detection field in a matter of seconds. The announcement of the use of Fata generated immediate panic in several Israeli cities. TV networks showed images of people running desperate to the shelters as soon as the sirens sounded. So far, Iran claims to have fired at least 2 of these hypersonic missiles. However, here comes an important detail. There is no confirmation regardless that they have reached their targets. The Israeli army, in turn, says he was able to intercept them before they were damaged. But it's hard to know the exact truth, because both Iran and Israel have reason to control the information. Iran wants to show strength to the Arab world and its allies, while Israel tries to maintain the confidence of its Western population and partners. In addition to Fata, Another weapon that has gained prominence in recent days was Karamshar-4, a long-range missile capable of reaching targets over 2,000 kilometers away and carrying up to 2 tons of explosives. On June 18th, the Iranians made a launch of this model aimed at a strategic military target within Israel. The result? Israeli sources indicate that the missile was intercepted still in the initial flight phase, or that it suffered a technical failure during the trajectory. Iran says the impact was successful. Once again is the game of versions, typical of modern conflicts. Israel's great concern is not just dealing with the missiles that arrive, but with the pace they keep coming. The stock of intercepting missiles is not infinite, and each missile released to intercept costs tens of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, the cost of production of many of the Iranian projectiles is much lower. This equation begins to weigh in Israel's pocket. Interception replacement logistics is a real challenge. Military sources report that if the conflict continues at this pace, Israel may begin to suffer from the lack of interceptors in the coming weeks. And when that happens, each missile that escapes air defense can mean deaths and destruction. Iran knows that. Therefore, the launch campaign continues constantly. Small daily attacks with missiles and drones are maintained precisely to maintain pressure. It is a war of friction, where the goal is not only to cause immediate damage, but forcing the enemy to spend resources, keeping troops on a warning 24 hours a day, and especially to create panic among the civilian population. While all this happens, the Israeli radars operate on the edge. Air defense teams are working on exhaustive shifts with continuous alerts. With each launch signal detected in Iran, the protocol is triggered: trajectory calculation, missile type identification, response definition, all in a matter of seconds. An error of calculation, and an entire neighborhood can be hit. The climb between Iran and Israel is making it clear that this is not just a localized conflict, but a direct shock between state-of-the-art military technologies. What we are seeing now is a royal laboratory of modern war, where both sides are testing their strategic and technological limits. On the one hand, Israel with its multicam defense systems integrating Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow 3. On the other, Iran investing heavily in quantity, saturation, and now in quality with its hypersonic missiles and suicide drones. Israel's great challenge at this time is to maintain the operational sustainability of its air defense. Each interception performed represents a tactical victory, but also a very high financial cost. A single Iron Dome interceptor missile can cost between $40 and $100,000. Arrow 3 missiles, designed for long-range threats, cost millions of dollars per unit. Meanwhile, Iran spends a fraction of this value producing its short and medium-range missiles. It is a war of military economy as well. In addition, defense analysts are concerned about the possibility that Iran further expands the range of weapons used. It is expected that if the conflict is prolonged, Iran begins to mobilize other strategic actives, such as its Shahab 3 ballistic missiles, or even the mobilization of allied groups in the region, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and paramilitary groups in Iraq and Syria. This scenario would open multiple attacks of attack, forcing Israel to further divide their defensive abilities. In the psychological field, the Israeli population lives moments of daily tension. Air warning sirens became part of the routine. Children leaving schools to run to shelters, families passing entire nights in underground bunkers, a trade interrupted with each new alert. War is not just in heaven. It is within people's minds. Meanwhile, on social networks and the media, Iran makes a point of spreading images of its missile launches, showing strength and ability to respond. The narrative war is as intense as physical war. Tehran's goal is clear: to show the world that, even under international sanctions and political isolation, the country is still able to impose real costs on its largest regional enemy. On Israel's side, the government is still stating that the situation is under control. Military sources ensure that interceptor stocks are being replenished with the help of the United States and other Western allies. Military transport aircraft has often reached the Israeli bases, bringing new lots of interceptor missiles and defense equipment. But even with this external support, the question that remains is, how long will Israel be able to maintain this pace? The risk of interceptors' exhaustion is real. Analysts point out that if Iran continues with the current cadence of releases, Israel may be obliged to prioritize which targets will try to intercept. This means, in practice, to choose between protecting military bases, critical infrastructure, or densely populated civil areas. A dilemma that no military commander wants to face. On the Iranian side, the strategy seems to be precisely this: to force Israel to make difficult decisions. Each new release is a movement calculated to test the enemy's boundaries. A war of friction, where the goal is not only to destroy targets, but corrode the opponent's ability to respond in the long run. And while all this happens, the world observes carefully. Countries such as the United States, Russia, China, and members of the European Union follow each new development, concerned with the risk that conflict overflows to other regions of the Middle East. A poorly calculated attack, an interception failure, an assessment error, any of these factors can cause an even greater climbing, involving other countries and leading the world to a new international crisis. The situation is currently described by experts such as a war of friction and technology. On the one hand, hypersonic missiles, saturation drones, long-range ballistic missiles. On the other hand, multi-wide defense systems, state-of-the-art technology in radar and interception, as well as unprecedented international coordination to maintain operational Israeli defense stocks. But the big question that is in the air is, who will give in first? Israel, with psychological pressure, financial wear and tear, and the risk of collapse in the defenses? Or does Iran, with its logistical limitations, the risk of even more severe retaliation and growing international isolation? No one knows the answer. What we know is that the immediate future of the Middle East now depends on every missile that rises to heaven and every interceptor who tries, with each shot, avoid the worst.